This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good morning, Rabbi Glatstein. Bruchim Abam to the Kollel Agar de Perka here in Queens, Kew Garden Hills, New York. Ready holding in the days of Sfiras HaOmer, and we're going to learn today about a unique aspect of the Yom Tov of Shavuos that no other Yom Tov enjoys, and it's a very unknown halacha. It's a halacha that applies to Shavuos that no other Yom Tov has, and I bet no one ever heard it before. I'm willing to bet that this is one difference between Shavuos and other Yom Tovim, a halacha that applies to Shavuos that doesn't apply, and that you never heard before. I'm willing to bet you never heard this before. Okay, so first we have to know about a very interesting minhag that women have. That when they light the neiros of Yom Tov, they make Asher Kedeshanu Mitzvah Zanu Lahadlik Ner Shel Yom Tov, and then they do something very unusual, and that is they make a Shehecheyanu. Why in the world are they making a Shehecheyanu? What's wrong with their husband Shehecheyanu ala kais? What are they doing? Well, they have some patience. When we come to Shul Leil Yom Tov, do we start the davening with Shehecheyanu? That's what we do Yom Kippur. Do we do that on Yom Tov? No. We have patience. We don't do that on Yom Kippur, because in Yom Kippur there's no kais, right? There is no kiddush of Yom Kippur, so you have to make it in shul. But on a regular Yom Tov where we have kiddush, so you don't make the Shehecheyanu in shul, you make the Shehecheyanu al kais. So why do nashim make Shehecheyanu when they light candles? Now, did they always do this? No way. They didn't always do this. Do they do this in the times of the Midbar? No. Times of Midbar, they didn't do this. They do this times of Bayis Rishon, Bayis Sheni, Tanaim, Amaram, no way. They did not start doing this. It's only the last few hundred years. Now it is older than Shlisel Chala, that I'll tell you, but it is relatively new in Judaism. And Rav Moshe Feinstein in the Igros Moshe Arachaim Chelek Dal Tzim Kafalf, he writes, "The Hazem Meos B'Shanim." It's already hundreds of years. Not thousands of years, only a few hundred years. Shahanoshim mavarchos zman b'shashim adlikin es haneros b'Yom Tov. They make a Shehecheyanu when they light the neros of Yom Tov. Is this correct? Is this good? Not really. No. It would be better, he says. Av shelachayra hayoyoser tav. It would be better shelo yavarchu zman, that if they don't make a Shehecheyanu, meyacha shia koishal kiddush levarchalav, because we know whenever you could put brachos ala kois. This is always better. Says Rav Moshe, I don't necessarily endorse this, and I'm not complimentary of this minhag, but what could we do? He's just reporting the facts are, for hundreds of years, women are making a Shehecheyanu on the neros of Yom Tov.
The minhag was only for women, not for unmarried men?
Married men don't light neros.
Unmarried.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, unmarried men did not make a Shehecheyanu because they made Kiddush. They make Kiddush. Only for women who did not make Kiddush. And what?
In my case,
right, so that's what he's mentioning. So there's no minhag for men to make the Shehecheyanu on the Neiros, only the women. Okay? Now, right, correct. Now, who's the first to observe this custom of women? The first to observe this custom was none other than the great Achroin, who the Chassam Sofer calls a Navi. By the way, you should know, there's only one person that the Chassam Sofer ever called a Navi, and that is Rabbi Yaakov Emden. Chassam Sofer said about him that he's a Navi. Okay? Very interesting. But he writes over here, in the Sheila Siyavitz, Chelek Aleph, Siman Kuf Zayin. Sheila Kuf Zayin. Shalom, Ahuvi, Yedidi, peace to my beloved friend, Hagavir. Shin Yud. Shlomcha Yiskeh, your peace should flourish. Aleph Daled Shin. Achar Drishas Shloimai. Gimel Yud Hey. Now this is a good one. What does Gimel Yud Hey stand for? Galile Yadav Hatahayros. Okay, these were compliments back then. Wow. Nowadays we say you're a good guy. Yeah. Right? But those days they said Galile Yadav Hatahayros. Higiani, I got your beautiful letter. V'hayali lenachas. I had a lot of nachas from it. V'hiniani ad la'achas. I had pleasure. Oidos she'eloisav shinches she'elas chacham chatzi tshuva. Okay. V'hinei b'rishayna diber nechan. At first you're speaking correctly. V'yafa kivan la'aniyas daiti. And you know what? I think, right, great minds think alike. I think, though, just like you. Le'arer al minag hanoshim hamavarches Shehecheyanu adlalakas ner diyamtiv. I would have liked to protest when women make Shehecheyanu when they light the candles. Why? V'ta'anois of gedolos, and you have good tainos. Machma shaloi niskar b'shum paiseg. It's not mentioned in any paiskim that women should do this. Whoa! So now let's stop. We could give a shiur on this line. In other words, what are women allowed to do? Well, what's wrong? Why can't I do it? It doesn't say anywhere I'm not allowed to. No, that's not what we do. We see, where in the paiskim does it say you can? See, that's what Rabbi Yaakov Emden writes. You have a good taina, because it doesn't say in the paiskim that women can make this Shehecheyanu. Yeah, but it doesn't say they can't. No, we don't. Judaism doesn't work that way. We need precedent. We need precedent. Okay. Now, he brings, but there is precedent. Rak bekitzer shla. In the Sefer Kitzer Shla, it says that women can make a Shehecheyanu on Neiros Yom Tif. Says Rabbi Yaakov Emden, the Kitzer Shla is not a reliable Sefer. It's not a reliable Sefer. Now, the Shla, of course, the Shla, al pidvar vanu soimchem, al pidvar vanu chayin. But the Kitzer Shla is something else. Devadei la bar samchahu. V'oid, another reason. Now, that's reason number one. Reason number one why women should not make the Shehecheyanu, because it doesn't say it in Shulchan Aruch. So you could be sure if in Shulchan Aruch it says they can't put on the tefillin, then certainly they can't do, right? Here, right, you get the argument is it's not brought down that they can. And number two, v'oid, Doloi adif mi bercha Shehecheyanu, da'asiyah sukkah, shenizka b'shas. You know, in the Gemara in Sukkah it says that when you build the sukkah, what bracha do you make? Shehecheyanu. And we don't do that. We don't follow that. Instead, we put the Shehecheyanu al hakois in Kiddush. V'anu soimchem al shel Kiddush. So in other words, ask from Yaakov Emden, if even when the Shas says you can make Shehecheyanu, we wait, then we make it on Kiddush, so certainly in this case, where there's no makar for women to make Shehecheyanu al haneiros, what do? We should certainly not allow it, and they should wait to make the Shehecheyanu on Kiddush. Havadei kushatova. And you should know, my dear friend, v'chaye demar, I swear, says Rabbi Yaakov Emden, shemiyoim amdi al daiti, as soon as my senses kicked in, hayagam kein davar tumah be'ena. This was very strange. V'ratzisi limchais be'ishti, and I wanted to protest against my wife, mitam zeh. See, he wanted to. He wanted to. V'af al pikein, lo yasisi masa. Nevertheless, I didn't act. I didn't tell her to stop. V'hinachti la minhaga ha'machzik b'yada. And I let her do her thing.
Smart man.
Why? Why? What about the fact, isn't it a bracha levatala? No, it's not a bracha levatala. Ki be'emes chshash bracha levatala. Now he's pointing out the questioner who's asking Rabbi Yaakov Emden thought it was a bracha levatala. Says Rabbi Yaakov Emden, no, it's not a bracha levatala. Ein kan la niyas daiti. You know why? Because let's say if in the middle of Kiddush, when the husband's saying Shehecheyanu, the wife chimes in, Baruch atah Hashem Eloheinu melech haolam, Shehecheyanu v'kiyimanu v'giyanu la'azman hazeh. Is that a bracha levatala? No. If she chooses not to be yotze with her husband and chooses to make her own Shehecheyanu, because don't they hate, she's allowed to do that. Right? If she wanted not to fulfill the chiyuv Shehecheyanu through the husband, no one would stop her from making a bracha that she's certainly chayav in, because women are obligated in Yom Tif, right? And women therefore are obligated in Shehecheyanu. Look in the parentheses, the hani nashi, women, hova isnu b'shmira, they're now do malacha on Yom Tif, u'v'zechira, they have the positive commands of Yom Tif, u'v'simchas Yom Tif, pshita debayit bruchiz manami, it's obvious they need to make a Shehecheyanu. So if she would choose in the middle of Kiddush to go like this, her husband might not appreciate it, but she's entitled to ignore his Shehecheyanu, make her own Shehecheyanu. Not only that, even a woman who doesn't light candles for whatever reason, if she wanted to make the Shehecheyanu as soon as Yom Tov started, wonderful, she's allowed to. You know why? The Kaimalan, Zman, Oimrai, Afilu, B'shuk. We hold the Shehecheyanu, B'di'evet, you don't need a kais, you don't need anything, you can make it in the street. Where there's a kais, we rely on the kais. There's no bracha batala if she would choose to make her own Shehecheyanu. Lefi shahayoim garim leberachas hazman keniskar. The day causes a Shehecheyanu. She's mechuyev in the day. She's mechuyev in the Shehecheyanu. Umishum, right? So if a woman wanted, let's say, if a woman wanted, as soon as Yom Tov started, to walk out into the street and to say Shehecheyanu, gesundheit, no problem. But what do you mean we're going to make it later? She's making it now. We would never. So the fact that she's attaching it to Hadlakas Ner Yom Tov, loy gara b'hachi. B'shaper dami, kivan shehu ba'tchila. The Hadlakas Ner is the first mitzvah that she performs. Uvay nikar kavod Yom Tov v'simchasa. So therefore, says Rabbi Yaakov Emden, it's not the end of the world if a woman chooses not only, right, if a woman would choose to ignore her husband's Shehecheyanu, she could make her own. And therefore, in this case, it's not so terrible for her to make the Shehecheyanu on the Hadlakas Ner Yom Tov. And therefore, when I see my wife making Shehecheyanu on Hadlakas Ner Yom Tov, even though would it be better for her not to and wait for me? Yes. But is it worth being moicha? No. Now you see over here, the issues of shalom bayis are not playing a role in this. His decision, should he protest or not, right? We're assuming they have a good, they have good communication over here. If he would tell her something, she would listen, right? That's not the issue. The issue is, should he be moicha in something she's been doing for a long time? So he says like this: Al kein amarti la'atzmi, hanach lohen minhagan. I'll let her do her minhag. Shehu Yerusha lahen me'avosein, which she yarshin from her parents. Va'asu kain b'fnei gedolei olam. And she has been doing this minhag, and her parents have been doing this minhag before great gedolim. Ubeyichad hadidan divras mari de'ovdahi, and especially my wife and your wife, he says to the questioner, who are v'iloi dechazi lebnei nosha layavda. Had they not seen great gedolim do this, they would never do this. Even though I have no idea why my father-in-law let her do this in the first place, but that's a different story. He writes in the parentheses. By the way, Rabbi Yaakov Emden was married to the daughter of Rabbi Mordechai ben Naftali Kohen, the Rav of Broida. He says, I have no idea. I don't know why the Shver let this. And I would like to be able to be mamletz and come up with a defense of this minhag. I would have liked to defend the practice if there's any basis in any of the normative svarim. I have not seen, not the Shach, not the Taz, not the Magen Avraham, not the... Nobody of note mentioned this minhag. Therefore, it is very hard in my eyes to allow women to do this without any basis. Says Rabbi Yaakov Emden, if you decide to move out to some new community and start a new neighborhood, women should not be saying Shehecheyanu when they light Ner Yom Tov. We do not allow women to make Shehecheyanu when they light in a place where there's no minhag. And you're right. It's not any different than the fact that the Gemara says to make Shehecheyanu on the sukkah when you make it and we wait for the kais. Certainly, we should not allow women to develop this minhag. But a woman who claims her grandmother and her great-grandmother has been doing it, fine. You don't have to turn over the world to stop the minhag, but to start this minhag, chas v'shalom. Chas v'shalom.
The fact that Shehecheyanu is being said before Yom Tov begins, because if they 18 minutes before Shiur,
they're makabel it now. They're makabel it. They're makabel it. Yeah, they're makabel. Well, first they're making the bracha al haner. Yeah. So that's their Mekabel Yom Tif. And once they say that, they can make a Shehecheyanu. Okay. So Rabbi say, we're not here to start up with this minhag. If Rabbi Yaakov Emden, by the way, it's very interesting. Rabbi Yaakov, was there anyone ever more outspoken against any deviance than Rabbi Yaakov Emden? Any slight right or left turn, Rabbi Yaakov Emden had his own printing press in his house, and he would publish svarim, right, against. But when it comes to his wife, he's careful, it doesn't matter who, Gedolei Yisrael, Rabbi Yaakov Emden, but nevertheless, this minhag, Rabbi Yaakov Emden sort of put his hands back and said, we'll let it continue. So then if, we'll make a kal v'chomer, if Rabbi Yaakov Emden didn't stop it, if Rabbi Moshe didn't stop it, what could we say? So we're going to take it, what?
If this is a minhag that's not mikubal, it's something mikubal, but it's not the right thing to do. So what? So he came into to a minhag, and they could do it.
No. So he points out that they're not violating anything by making the Shehecheyanu.
It's not a batala.
That's what he said. It's not a bracha l'batala, because if you want to start the Yom Tov by stams making a Shehecheyanu, a woman would be allowed to. If a woman would want to ignore during Kiddush her husband's Shehecheyanu, she could ignore it and make her own. So she's not doing anything wrong. It's just preferable to hear the Shehecheyanu ala kais. But there's no Isser, or even shemetz of an Isser, that a woman is violating by making the Shehecheyanu on Halakas Ner Yom Tov. It's just, it would have been better had she waited. Okay?
But, at this point, does it have minhag avos b'yadenu status?
If she wouldn't.
Well, the status that it has is, like Rav Moshe says, it's already hundreds of years that they've been doing this. That's the status. It's something they've been doing for hundreds of years. Rav Moshe doesn't stamp it with the endorsement of Minhag Yisrael Torah. He just says it's been hundreds of years. You have often, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky writes about certain things. If I would have the strength, I would be mevatel it. Not everything that's not perfect, you're mevatel. It doesn't mean it's wonderful or it's great. It's tolerated, exactly. So that's what Rabbi Yaakov.
In 100 years, say no.
So because if Rabbi Yaakov Emden didn't do it, so who are we to?
It's grandfathered in.
Exactly, right. So now we're going to take that as for granted, Rabbi Isai, that this is what women do. That when they light the Ner Yom Tov, women make Shehecheyanu. As far as I know, all women do this. You'll correct me if I'm wrong.
What would be the case if she answered Amen to the Shana of the Rabbi? It would be Hepsik.
So that's what we're going to talk about today. Now,
it's in every sitter.
Decide on what?
The wives don't make Shehecheyanu on the candles.
On the Ner Yom Tov?
Yeah.
But they light Ner Yom Tov, right?
They light, but they don't say Shehecheyanu.
They don't?
No, they depend on their husband.
They listen?
Who don't say
Okay, so Svardim, you have them
we don't
trained.
say it all.
No, but the men says. The
women don't say it all by the nose.
So you have them managed properly, but Ashkenazim are still. Okay, so Rabbi said this is what Rabbi Yaakov Emden writes, and Rabbi Moshe Feinstein also. We sort of tolerate the fact that women are making their own Shehecheyanu. Okay, now here's the question: if a woman does make a Shehecheyanu when she lights the candles, and for some reason the husband's not home and she has to make Kiddush, should she make Shehecheyanu again? Certainly not. For her to make a Shehecheyanu again would definitely be a bracha levatala l'kulayama. That's what Rav Shlomo Zalman.
By Kol Nidre, right? When women go to shul, the Rav specifically announces
they don't make Shehecheyanu. Right? That they don't. Correct. Right. Okay. Good. Right. So Rav Shlomo Zalman writes. Look at number 3 in the Halicha Shloimei. Hine im bircha ha'isha Shehecheyanu ad la'alokas haneros mi ba'od yom. Nira she'ein la levarech she'enis b'shas kiddush shari kvar einena mechuyeves bracha zu. She already made the bracha. So Rav Shlomo Zalman says it in a certain tone that she shouldn't do it. Rav Sternbuch goes a little further that not only should she not do it, he says like this. Look at number 4 in the Haggadah.
But some like in Pesach they have Shehecheyanu on certain things, on matzos, on the day.
We'll see. Okay, look in the Ma'adim Izmanim of Rav Sternbuch. Noshim shekvar amru Shehecheyanu ba'alokas neiros lo yomru achshav oidapam dahava bracha levatala. It's a bracha levatala. So it's worse than she shouldn't do it. She does it. It's a bracha levatala. Now here's the big sugya, and I venture to say that I am going to surprise you with what the halacha is, because I think most people are under a certain impression. And that is the impression that we're going to start with. And says Rav Moshe Sternbuch, can she answer amen to her husband Shehecheyanu? Says Rav Sternbuch, va'afilu amen layanu. She should not answer amen. Why? Because for her kiddush doesn't need a Shehecheyanu. So when she hears the husband saying Shehecheyanu, that's an extraneous thing in the kiddush. So for her to answer amen, for example, let's say you're in the middle of saying kiddush, right? And somebody comes out of somebody is passing by, and he says, in middle, right? In the middle of you hearing Kiddush from somebody, a guy on the outside makes a ha'etz. Do you answer amen to someone's ha'etzim of Kiddush? Of course not. It would be a Hepsik.
Right.
So for you to answer Amen, for the woman to answer Amen, to the husband Shehecheyanu, says Rav Sternbach is a Hepsik in her Kiddush, and therefore she should not answer Amen. The Ulai...
Avada is matir this. He says she can say Amen.
We'll see. The Ulai Havala, the two, Hepsik L'shia. Says Rav Sternbach, this is a Hepsik. That's the Haggadah Shel Pesach Mayadim Bizmanim, and in the Mayadim Bizmanim itself, he writes that women who make Shehecheyanu, when they light the Neiros, she should not make Shehecheyanu again in Kiddush, and she should also not answer Amen, because then her Amen is going to be a Hefsek between the Boi Pri Hagafen and the Te'ima, and therefore, says of Sternbach, women should not answer Amen. Comes along the Har Tzvi.
Sorry. The bracha itself that the husband is making,
Yeah.
that's not a hafsaka for her because he's not drinking after the Kiddush. He's talking, he's speaking it's irrelevant.
You mean it's worse than answer Amen? Forget about the Amen. She's hearing Kiddush from somebody that, in terms of her chiyuvim, this person is being mafsik between the Kiddush and the drinking. Why? Because as far as she's concerned, Shehecheyanu is completely unnecessary. Okay, so the Har Tzvi wants to say even further. Maybe a woman can't be Yotzei Kiddush with a man on Leil Yom Tif. Why? Because the man needs to say Shehecheyanu. She doesn't need to say Shehecheyanu. So as far as she's concerned, the guy who's making Kiddush, imagine if you heard Kiddush from somebody, right? And the guy started making, Boirei Pri Ha'etz. And then he said, Al Natilas Lulav, in the middle of, And then he said, he made all kinds, starts making brachas on a rainbow. So now you're a Kiddush. You can't start making outside brachas and other Kiddush.
He's the one who's making. For him, it's requirements. The famous shaila is that a man, when he comes home, he daven. The woman didn't daven, right?
Right.
So his Kiddush obligation is the Rabbanan. Hers is the Oraisa. So he says Good Shabbos. So they say Good Shabbos to each other. So now once that she said Good Shabbos, her requirement goes down.
Downgraded.
So here also, he's the one who's making Kiddush. So even though he has a high requirement.
Yeah, but his higher requirement is inserting something that, as far as she's concerned, is extraneous.
But it's relevant.
Not for her. Not for her. So as she's concerned, this guy's talking about, the weather in Japan. Shehecheyanu is irrelevant to her. Okay, we'll see. We'll see. But now it's more than the Amen. Maybe the Shoymei HaKoina itself is a Hepsik. Because we know, what's the halacha? If a person's in the middle of Shemona Esrei, and they hear the Shliach Tzibor saying Kaddish or Kedusha. So what do? So the Shita of Rashi is, you stop and listen. And listening is not a Hefsik. Listening is good enough. It's like you answered. But it's not a Hepsik. But Tosfos' Shita is what? That if stopping and listening is like answering, then it's also like a Hepsik. And Tosfos paskins that if you're Mil Shemona Esrei, Tosfos' Shita is, you cannot stop and listen. Because if stopping and listening is like answering, then it's like being mafsik also. But Tosfos says, the minhag is, nevertheless, to stop and listen, and Tosfos says, Gadol ha-minhag. Okay? Which implies that even though Tosfos his arm is being twisted, even though he feels that listening really is a hefsek, but since that's what people do, it's makubal, so therefore we'll accept it, we'll tolerate it, says Tosfos. But Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank is medayik that the only reason why Tosfos is willing to accept it is only because the guy has no other option. The guy's in the middle of Shemona Esrei, he's going to miss out on Kedusha, so he stops and listens. But let's say, for example, a guy's putting on Tefillin Shel Yad, so if the Shehecheyanu is up to Kedusha, so he has no choice, he'll stop and listen, he has to hear Kedusha. But let's say a guy knows that if he's going to start to put on Tefillin now, he's going to be in a matzav where he'll have to stop and listen between Tefillin Shel Yad and Tefillin Shel Rosh. So then we should tell him, Tosfos is only willing to tolerate that it's not a hefsek. But don't put yourself in a matzav l'chadchila where you're going to have to stop and listen and it might be a hefsek. So, says the Tzvi Pesach Frank, we would tell the guy, don't start to put on the Tefillin yet. Yeah. So therefore in this case, says the Tzvi Pesach Frank, why put the woman in a matzav where she's going to have to stop and listen to Shehecheyanu, which is a hefsek for her? Better for her, make her own Kiddush. once you're allowing women's lib and letting her make the Shehecheyanu on Ner Yom Tif, so go all the way, just let her make her own Kiddush. Because don't put her in this matzav. But then Rav Pesach Frank says, maybe you could say like this. When is it that Rabbeinu Tam has to tolerate that stopping? We'll say, you know what? It's not a Hepsik. That's only for Kedusha. Where the guy who is a Milshman Esrei, he has a chiyuv to hear Kedusha. So for him, it's not so great for him to have to stop and listen to Kedusha in Milshman Esrei, because this is something he needs to listen to. So he has to come on to Shemei Ka'ina. So Rabbeinu Tam feels if you're going to have to come on to Shemei Ka'ina, then maybe it's a Hepsik. But the woman in the middle of Kiddush, she doesn't need the Shehecheyanu. In fact, she doesn't want it. So when it comes to Shehecheyanu, she'll listen, but she won't listen a Shemei Ka'ina dika listening. She'll sort of be listening, but not trying to have the Shehecheyanu a credit to her account. So this is a debate that the Hartzvi has with himself, so to speak. This is he's vacillating as to whether it's appropriate for a woman, once she's made the Shehecheyanu, to even hear Kiddush from her husband the night of Yom Tov. Let's take a look quickly at number 6. He says, Al derech mashen asar b'Yerushalayim. This is the issue in Yerushalayim l'inyan brichas HaKiddush b'leil HaSeder l'gabei noshim. D'mikivan she'anoshim bein kach tzrichas lishtas as a kais shabiyadan. Since women have to drink their own kais, maybe women should make her own Kiddush and not be Yotze Kiddush through the husband. Because since she was already Yotze the Shehecheyanu, so her Amen is going to be a Hepsik. Look in the last line of the bold, maybe the Eitzah is, let the woman not answer Amen. So says Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank, just to tell a woman not to answer Amen, it's not going to correct the issue. Hine takana zu hirak legabe aniyas Amen shlo yitei hefsek. Aval hakati yesh la'ayin. You could still look into it. Shashmiya atzma shel berachas Shehecheyanu tei nechshav k'hefsek. The listening alone should be a hefsek. Like the Shulchan Aruch paskins, that if you hear Kaddish between Shel Yad and Shel Roish, don't be mafsek to answer, but be quiet. Why? Like the Beis Yosef explains, because we paskin that Shomei is ka'ina regarding responding, but it's not a hefsek. And the source is from Rashi and Masechta Brachas, Daf Chaf Alef Amud Beis, Tosfos quotes Rashi and Sukkah, that if somebody's davening and hears the Chazan saying Kaddish or Kedusha, you're not allowed to stop and answer, but you should be quiet and listen, and Shomei ka'ina. Rabbeinu Tam and the Ri say, Adarabba, if Shomei is ka'ina, then it's a hefsek. And the words of Tosfos are Mikal Makoim Nohagu Ha'am Lishtaik. Even though Rabbeinu Tam feels it's a hefsek, Begadol HaMinhag. It says of Tzvi Pesach Frank, I feel that the language of Tosfos is mashma that Gadol HaMinhag is only b'diavad, and that is if someone's a middle Shemana Esrei, what could he do? He has no eitzah, so he stops and is quiet and listens. Right? Stop, drop, and roll. Stop, drop, and listen to Kaddish. Right? But l'chadchila, you need to be choishish for the Shita Rabbeinu Tam, not to put yourself in a matzav where you're going to have to stop and listen, because maybe that's a hefsek. And therefore, maybe this woman, we should tell her, make your own Kiddush.
Before her husband makes the Kiddush.
Why before? That much lib we're not giving her, We'll let the husband make the first one.
Making Kiddush
No, she could do it quietly or something. Yeah, I don't know.
I think most women would prefer not to say Shehecheyanu at Lagas Neros and still be part of the husband's Kiddush.
Okay. But then he says, on the other hand, you could say a svara that maybe Rabbeinu Tam and the Ri are only saying Shemei Kohen is a hefsek if it's something that you need to hear, like Kedusha. In other words, if you're Milshman Esrei, you need to hear Kedusha every day. So what could you do? You need to stop and listen, but your listening is in a way where you want to be Yaitse. If you want to be Yaitse, then it's like you said it, it's a hefsek. But Masha'en Kain, if you're listening to the woman who's listening to her husband's Kiddush, she doesn't need the Shehecheyanu, so she's not going to listen in a way of Shemei Ka'ina. Okay, so this is one extreme of the issue. This is the Shita of Rav Moshe Sternbach and the Hartzvi, that even just answering Amen to the bracha of Shehecheyanu, the husband, would constitute a hefsek, to the point where Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank is thinking, maybe she can't even listen to her husband's Kiddush altogether. Comes Rav Moshe Feinstein, Zertzak Levracha, in the Igros Moshe, Arachaim Chelek Daled, Siman Kof Aleph, and Rav Moshe revolutionizes this sugya, And I don't know why there's such a big misconception. A lot of people are choshesh for this. Rav Sternbach, Rav Moshe says, no problem, she can answer on me. No problem. Why? What's the svara?
And every Yom Tov, only in Pesach.
Every Yom Tif. Why? Says Rav Moshe, Rav Yaakov Emden, the reason he's not protesting is not because he's afraid of his wife or he's afraid to rock the boat. The reason he says why he didn't protest. He's not protesting because the women who make the Shehecheyanu, alaneres, they're not doing anything wrong. There's no avla in making a Shehecheyanu alaneres. It's just would have been preferable had they waited. Says Rav Moshe, if you're going to tell a woman, yeah, you can make Shehecheyanu al haneros, but then when your husband makes kiddush, don't answer amen. That's an avla. That's an avla. How could you tell somebody not to answer amen? You're mechuyev to answer amen whenever you hear a bracha. So says Rav Moshe, first of all, the Metziah says reality is that who's going to remember? Women aren't going to answer amen. You could tell them 1,000 times, don't answer amen. They're not going to remember. They're going to answer amen. You could tell them before Kiddush, listen, here's the halacha. You already made Shehecheyanu. Don't answer amen to my Shehecheyanu. And you know what's going to happen? They're going to answer amen. And you say, but I just told you. And I also just told you to do something, right? So they're not going to listen. They're not going to listen. They're not going to remember. They're not going to remember. So it's an avla to have a woman make Shehecheyanu on the Neiros. If you're going to say the halacha is that she can't answer amen on the husband's kiddush, then this minhag is a minhag batas. Because then Rabbi Yaakov Emden should have shried chai v'kayam that this is a bad minhag. Because what are you going to tell? If the woman's not answer amen, she's going to make a mistake and answer amen. And even if she's going to remember, it's still an avla to tell somebody not to answer amen on a bracha. Because we know the Torah tells us, Shulchan Aruch tells us, whenever you hear a bracha, you're mechuyev to say amen. So to have a minhag where you're putting a woman in a matzav where she can't answer amen, that is a terrible minhag. And Rav Yaakov Emden says Rav Moshe should have protested and destroyed the minhag of a woman making Shehecheyanu al haneros and then not answering amen to her husband's bracha. Elamai what? Elamai says Rav Moshe, you know why Rav Yaakov Emden didn't protest? Because she makes a Shehecheyanu on the haneros and she answers amen to her husband's Shehecheyanu. In other words, says Rav Moshe, I feel that if a woman would not be allowed to answer amen to her husband's kiddush, that should have been enough of a reason for Rabbi Yaakov Emden to tell his wife, it's over. No more Shehecheyanu on the Neiros. That's enough of a reason. Is it such a big avla to have a minhag where the only bad ramification of the minhag is you're just not going to answer amen to one bracha? Yeah. So if you want to know what kind of minhag is considered minhag batas, if the minhag even makes a person overlook one sif in any of the Shulchan Aruch, it's not a good minhag. That's what Rav Moshe says. Says Rav Moshe, he says like this. Let's see. Look at number 8. Bidvar minhagenu, regarding our minhag, sha'isha mevareches man v'yamtav v'shas halakas haneros. Can she answer amen? Says Rav Moshe, l'chayro, she should not be able to answer amen because it's a Hepsik. But he quotes the minhag that Rabbi Yaakov Emden brings down that for hundreds of years, women have been making Shehecheyanu al haneros. Now look about 12 lines down. First word on the line is varak by the dot. Im haya iser lanois amen midin Hepsik. Ben habracha lashtia. If a woman was not allowed to answer amen, hayatam gadol limchais ulahafshiv zel minhag batas. This would be enough of a reason to consider it a minhag batas. Ve'af she'ika etza shalaitana amen. Even though, what do you mean? Let the woman make the Shehecheyanu and then don't answer amen. Number one, levach lo yizar was that. Number one, they're not going to listen. They're not going to be careful. And number two, hareze gufa asur ligroim shaloi lanois amen abracha. You're not allowed to have any minhag or do anything to cause someone not to answer amen. To chiyuv gadol lanois amen. Even if you don't need the bracha. If you hear a bracha, there's a tremendous chiyuv to answer amen. So how could you have a minhag that puts a woman in a matzav where she can't answer amen? And he brings many proofs there's a chiyuv to answer amen. Number one, is the lashon of the Rosh. In the Kitzur Piskei Harash. Does anyone know who wrote the Kitzur Piskei Harash? The son of the Rosh, the Torah, wrote it. He says like this: Ein sarich lanois amein achar hatinoika shalom dem habrachim pirabim. If you're passing by a cheder and you hear kids learning brachos from the Rebbe, ein sarich, you don't have to answer amein. Now, if in general there's never a chiyuv to answer amein, why would the Kitzur Piskei Harash say you don't have to answer amein to kids? You don't have to answer amein to anybody. It must be in general tzarech u'mechuyev la'anois amein. And in this matzav, ain't tzarech. Otherwise, if there was never a chiyuv, then the Torah should have wrote, ein oinen, we don't answer. Okay, what's the svara? Says Ramesha, but Lamaisa, this woman already made a Shehecheyanu, so she doesn't need her husband's Shehecheyanu. What's the svara that she should answer amen to her husband's Shehecheyanu? Svara is like this. Maybe Stephen was saying this before, but the svara is like this. What's the halacha? I'm going to ask you a very interesting case. Rav Shlomo is being boitzeya for everybody over here. He has two big chalas. Hamoitzi lechem min haaretz. He takes a piece, he takes a bite out of the piece. Now he's giving out the challah. Are you allowed to talk before you eat your piece?
No.
No, right? No. You're allowed to. The Ramah says in Siman Kuf Samach Zayin, Sivav, you're allowed to. We don't paskin like the Ramah. All the Achronim argue. But the Ramah paskins that once the Boitseya is Tayim, everyone else could talk. Why? Because whenever you're being yotzei a bracha from somebody, you are tafel and secondary to the mavarech. And as long as he's good to go, you're good to go. Now we pass now, most of the Achronim argue, almost all the Achronim argue and say, yeah, but it's not better than if you would be making the bracha yourself, and if you would be making the bracha yourself, you can't talk before you eat. But the Ramah says it is better than if you'd be doing it yourself. Because someone's doing it for you, and you are secondary to him.
But you shouldn't grab the challah before he eats the challah.
Maybe that's al tzilchos derech eretz.
So what would be the case?
But I thought because he's the one who's making the bracha, he's being motzi you in the bracha.
No, but after he eats,
he makes the bracha. You're hungry, his child is hungry, and he grabs the bracha. He grabs the challah before he eats it. Isn't that a problem?
He eats the challah before the...
He eats the challah or he talks?
He eats the challah.
I don't remember at the moment. I don't know if it's mamish aser, but the Ramah paskins that once the Boitseya eats, everyone else could talk.
Without eating.
But the
Why? The halach is not like that. Yeah. Okay, what I said, the halach is not like the Ramah. But let's understand the sheet of the Ramah. The sheet of the Ramah is like this: that once the main person did what he needs to do, everyone else is secondary. Everyone else is subsumed. If he's good to go, they're good to go. Everyone else is sort of hanging on to him. Now, why do most Achronim argue? Only because it's not any better than if you would be making the bracha yourself. And if you'd be making the bracha yourself, you couldn't talk before you ate. So now also you can't talk before you eat. Says Rav Moshe Feinstein, you see from this Ramah a very important yesod, and that is the one being moitzi others is the primary, and everyone else is secondary. So therefore, says Rav Moshe, if the mavarech making kiddush, he needs a Shehecheyanu, then it's not considered extraneous for everybody else. Why? Because everyone else is only secondary to them. But I don't need it. Who are you? You're a nobody. You're just hanging on to the leg of the one who's being moitzi. And says Moshe, I'll bring you a raya gedola from the Takana that in Kiddush we make the bracha. The Gemara in Sukkah says on Daf Nun Vav that you make the bracha of Leishev Vasukah in Kiddush, and the Baal Habayis is making Kiddush, and he's moitzi his wife and his family, and he makes the bracha of Leishev Vasukah. Now, there are many Rishonim who hold, namely Rambam and Rashi, that a woman does not make a Leishev Vasukah. Now Ashkenazim do, and if I'm not mistaken, Sfardim do not. Right? Is that correct? Mm-hmm. Right, Rabbi Vadia has a very big tshuva. He says, you want to send your daughters to Ashkenazic schools? Fine. But why are you having them being corrupted by the Ashkenazim and having them making a leishev sukkah on the sukkah? Right? I think he even says they shouldn't make a Baruch Sha'amar and Yishtabach, if I'm not mistaken, that women should not make, right? Sfardim do not make Baruch HaMitzvah. A mitzvah says Shazman Grama. Right? So I'm going to ask you something. So a Sephardic woman who hears her husband saying Kiddush in the sukkah, and the husband's making a leishev sukkah, but how could she be yotze with that Kiddush? Her husband is saying a bracha that for her is a Hepsik.
Well, now she's Ashkenaz.
What? No, she's married to a Sephardi. She's married to a Sephardi. She's married to a Sephardi.
The concept that you said so beautifully before.
Okay, so what do you see from here? Now, does the Gemara say, the Gemara says clearly you make leishev sukkah, right? The Gemara says you make a leishev sukkah on the Kiddush. What do you mean? But what about your wife? How's your wife supposed to be yotze? Does the Gemara say she shouldn't answer Amen? Does the Gemara in Sukkah, when it says you should make leishev sukkah on the Kiddush, say, but your wife shouldn't answer Amen? And what about the fact that the klal is that if you haven't left the sukkah, what if you spend the whole sukkah in the sukkah? You don't keep on making another leishev sukkah. So what if somebody's mitzi you in Kiddush, he's making a leishev sukkah, and you don't need a leishev sukkah? Does the Gemara say you don't answer Amen to his leishev sukkah because I don't need it? No. What do you see from here? That any time you're being yotzei a bracha from someone else, you're secondary, you're subsumed, you're hanging on to him. Whatever he needs is not considered extraneous for you. Says Rav Moshe Feinstein, be it Pesach, be it Shavuos, be it Sukkot, despite the fact that the woman already made Shehecheyanu on halakas neros, nevertheless, if she hears Shehecheyanu from her husband, she should answer Amen. Because if the halacha is, Amen would be a Hepsik, then Rabbi Yaakov Emden should have spoke out against this minhag and abolished it. Why put someone in a matzav where they cannot answer Amen? So Rav Moshe Sternbach said it's a Hepsik. The Har Tzvi says maybe she can't even be yotze Kiddush from her husband. Moshe says no, she should answer Amen. Says Rav Shlomo Zalman also she should answer Amen. Look at number 9. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach also writes Gam Hanoshim Shekvar Birchu Shehecheyanu Bahadlakas Aneros Oinois Amen Al Birchu Shehecheyanu Shebekiddush Shalel Aseder. She should answer Amen, and he explains in the Dvar Halacha why. Because since this bracha is part of the Seder HaKiddush, therefore Amen is not a Hepsik. Okay, that's what I would normally suggest, to follow Rav Moshe, Shlomo Zalman, that it's not a Hepsik. But so we started off the Shiur. I was teasing you a little bit that there's a halacha by Shavuos, that Shavuos enjoys a halacha that no other Yom Tov enjoys, and that is, I want to tell you an in-between shita of the Shevet Halevi, Shmuel Halevi, Vosner, Chelek Gimel, Siman Samach Tes. He has a very nice chap. And he says like this. And I'll introduce it with the following Dvar Torah from Rabbi Cheskel Abramsky, a beautiful Vart. What Yom Tov in the Torah is called Atzeres? Shavuos. Good. Wrong. No. Shavuos does not, nowhere in the Chumash is Shavuos called Atzeres. There are only 2 days in the Chumash that are called Atzeres. The 7th day of Pesach and the 8th day of Sukkot.
Shmini Atzeret.
And the Chachamim in the Mishnah call Shavuos Atzeres. Why in the Chumash is Shavuos not called Atzeres, and the Mishnah it is called Atzeres? It says Rabbi Cheskel Abramsky. Every Yom Tov has mitzvahs. Pesach, you have matzah, maror, dalet koisei, sipur yitzis mitzrayim. It's not just Atzeres. Atzeres means you can't do malacha. It's positive. There are things to do b'kol ma'aseh. So Pesach is Pesach. Sukkot is Sukkot. You eat in the sukkah. You take dalet minim. Shmini Atzeres, there's nothing to do. There's no dalet minim. And the Chi of Sukkah is only Medina de Gemara, it's not Midoraisa. So what is Shmini Atzeres? The answer is it's Atzeres. It's a day that you're Atzer mi Malacha. In other words, a day that has no quality other than that you can't do Malacha is called Atzeres.
Extend your holiday.
It's called Atzeres means you now do Malacha. The only quality of the 8th day of Sukkot is you now do Malacha. The 7th day of Pesach, Matzah is over without the goin. Let's say Maror is over. What do you do? What is the 7th day of Pesach? It's Atzeres. The only thing you can't do is you can't do Malacha. But Shavuos is Yom HaBikurim in the Torah. You have to bring the Shtei Halachem. There's something positive that you do. But Achar the Churban, when there are no more Karbanos, so what's Shavuos? It's not Yom HaBikurim anymore. It's also Atzeres. So keep in mind that Bisman Hazeh, Shavuos has no mitzvahs other than not doing melacha. Says Rav Vosner, beautiful chap. Really, I agree to Rav Sternbach that answering Amen is a Hepsik. But when a woman is making a Shehecheyanu on the Neros of Yom Tif, what does she have in mind the Shehecheyanu is going on? She has in mind it's going on the Yom Tif. But what about the fact, besides going on the Yom Tif, there are a lot of mitzvahs that you're doing for the first time. Matzah, Marar, Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim, and so forth. She's not thinking about that. She's just only thinking about the Yom Tif. So when her husband says Shehecheyanu and Kiddush, she should have in mind that Shehecheyanu is also covering all the mitzvahs of Leil Seder. So her Amen is not a Hepsik, because she could use the additional Shehecheyanu of the husband for the added mitzvahs. So Leil Pesach Amen is not a Hepsik. Leil Sukkos, when she made the Shehecheyanu in Halachic Ner Yom Tif, she had in mind the Yom Tif, and when her husband's making Shehecheyanu, he also has in mind eating in the sukkah and the dalet and eating in the sukkah. So her answering Amen could also include all the additional mitzvahs that her original Shehecheyanu did not include. But on Shavuos, where there are no mitzvahs, Hayayim, so when she said Shehecheyanu in her Halachic Ner Yom Tif, that Shehecheyanu already covered everything it needs to, and her husband Shehecheyanu is not adding anything, then answering Amen is a Hepsik. So says Rav Vosner, an in-between shita. On Pesach and Sukkos, Amen is not a Hepsik, and on Shavuos, it is a Hepsik. So if you want to know what's the one halacha that applies to Shavuos that doesn't apply to anywhere else, according to Rav Vosner, Amen on the Shehecheyanu that a woman hears from her husband is a Hepsik by Shavuos, but not the other Yom Tov. But again, Rav Moshe holds it's never a Hepsik, and give you something to think about until the great day of Shavuos.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.